What if truth could lie? What if certainty itself collapsed under its own weight? A paradox is not a riddle with a neat answer. It's a mirror that shows the cracks in logic, reason, even reality itself. You think the world is stable, but these paradoxes will make you question every rule you've trusted. They live in a space where common sense fails, where mathematics argues with itself, and where philosophy turns into fire. Once you enter, you cannot walk out unchanged. Welcome to the world where answers deceive and questions never die. The Barber Paradox. Imagine a small town with a very peculiar barber. His rule is simple. He shaves everyone who does not shave themselves, and only those people. At first, it sounds harmless, almost logical. But then comes the question, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, he breaks his own rule, because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then by his rule, he must shave himself. Both answers collapse. Logic ties itself into a knot. This is the essence of the Barber Paradox, introduced by the mathematician Bertrand Russell. It wasn't just a playful thought experiment. It revealed a deeper flaw in mathematics and set theory. Russell discovered that if sets can contain themselves, contradictions explode. The barber is just a vivid way to show that some definitions self-destruct. So how do we solve it? The solution is not about choosing whether the barber shaves himself or not. It's about recognizing that the very definition of such a barber is impossible. The paradox tells us that certain ways of framing problems are fundamentally broken. Just as you can't draw a square circle, you can't have a barber defined by this rule. Russell's insight reshaped mathematics and logic. It forced thinkers to rebuild the foundations of set theory more carefully, creating safer systems that avoid these contradictions. The Barber Paradox is not about shaving. It's about the limits of definition and the traps that arise when language turns against itself. It reminds us, sometimes the problem isn't unsolvable. The problem is that the question itself should never have been asked. The Liar Paradox. Now, step deeper into the maze of contradiction. Picture a simple sentence. This statement is false. At first glance, it seems harmless, almost childish. But the moment you try to decide whether it's true or false, reason starts to eat itself. If the statement is true, then what it says must hold, that it is false. But if it is false, then it must actually be true. It flips endlessly, a mirror reflecting itself forever, with no stable answer. This is the infamous Liar Paradox, one of the oldest puzzles in philosophy, dating back to ancient Greece. What makes it so unsettling is its simplicity. Unlike complex theories or mathematical riddles, the Liar Paradox is built from nothing more than language itself. Words alone create a self-destructive loop. It is truth turning on itself, logic devouring its own foundation. Philosophers and logicians have wrestled with it for centuries. Some try to classify such sentences as neither true nor false. Others built entire logical systems to avoid this kind of collapse. In modern times, it has influenced mathematics, computer science, and even theories about artificial intelligence. After all, what happens when machines encounter statements that cannot be consistently processed? The deeper lesson here is profound. Truth is not as simple as yes or no. Our language, which we trust to capture reality, can twist into paradoxes that reveal its fragility. The Liar Paradox forces us to admit that not all statements can be neatly boxed into categories of true or false. Some live in the cracks between. It is not just a puzzle. It is a reminder that the boundaries of truth are far stranger and more fragile than we imagine. The Crocodile Paradox. Imagine a crocodile that has just snatched a child from the riverbank. The desperate parent pleads for the child's return. The crocodile, however, proposes a sinister bargain. I will return your child if, and only if, you correctly predict whether I will give the child back. This trap is known as the Crocodile Paradox, a problem of logic and self-reference that twists the very idea of prediction and truth. If the parent says, "You will return my child," then two outcomes are possible. If the crocodile indeed returns the child, the prediction is correct and the deal is honored. But if the crocodile refuses, the parent's prediction becomes false. Yet that refusal would itself be a violation of the crocodile's own condition. On the other hand, if the parent says, "You will not return my child," then the paradox deepens. If the crocodile refuses, the prediction is true, so by his own rule, he must return the child, contradicting himself. But if he does return the child, the prediction becomes false, once again collapsing the logic. No matter what the parent says, the crocodile is trapped in an impossible loop. It is a game of language where rules cancel themselves out. At its heart, this paradox is not really about crocodiles or children. It's about the fragility of conditions that rely on self-reference. It exposes how promises and predictions can collapse when they are tied too tightly to each other. Philosophers use it as a warning. Beware of systems that fold back on themselves. Just as the liar paradox showed the instability of truth in language, the crocodile paradox shows the instability of rules in action. It is a reminder that not all bargains can be honored, and not all games of logic can be won. The Pinocchio Paradox. Now, imagine Pinocchio, the wooden boy whose nose grows whenever he tells a lie. One day, he says, "My nose will grow now." And here begins the paradox. If his statement is true, his nose should grow. But if it grows, that would mean he told the truth, so it shouldn't grow at all. If a statement is false, then his nose must grow because he lied. But if it grows, his statement becomes true, which means it shouldn't have grown. A loop of contradictions, endless and unsolvable. This is the Pinocchio Paradox, a modern twist on the ancient liar paradox. But what makes it powerful is that it's embodied in a character we know. We can picture his wooden face, his nose stretching, and the logic collapsing into absurdity. It brings the abstract world of paradoxes into flesh, or, in this case, into wood. At its core, the paradox exposes the limits of rules when applied to themselves. The rule, "Pinocchio's nose grows when he lies," works fine in ordinary situations. But when it refers back to itself, when Pinocchio makes a statement about his own nose, it explodes. This isn't just a fairy tale puzzle. In philosophy, it echoes larger problems of self-reference. In mathematics, it resembles the logical traps that troubled Bertrand Russell. In computer science, it reflects what happens when a system tries to process instructions that contradict themselves. The Pinocchio Paradox shows us how fragile truth can be when caught in self-reflection. It forces us to ask, what happens when the rules that govern reality turn inward and collide with themselves? Sometimes, the greatest contradictions are hidden not in the vast universe, but in the smallest words we speak. The Raven Paradox. Consider this strange reasoning. All ravens are black. At first, it feels straightforward. Every time you see a black raven, the claim seems stronger. But here's the twist. Logically, the statement, "all ravens are black," is equivalent to saying, if something is not black, then it is not a raven. That means every green apple, every red car, every white shoe you see is, by pure logic, also evidence supporting the claim that all ravens are black. This is the Raven Paradox, first posed by philosopher Carl Hempel. It strikes at the heart of how we understand evidence, induction, and confirmation. Our intuition rebels. Seeing a green apple doesn't feel like evidence about ravens. And yet, if logic treats the two statements as identical, then every non-black, non-raven object should count as confirming the hypothesis. The paradox is not in the logic. It's in the gap between logical form and human intuition. What's the solution? Some philosophers argue that while each non-black, non-raven technically counts as evidence, the support it gives is minuscule compared to actually seeing ravens. A single black raven is vastly more informative than a million green apples. Others argue that this paradox reveals a flaw in equating logical equivalence with evidential equivalence. At its core, the Raven Paradox forces us to confront how fragile our reasoning about evidence truly is. It shows us that induction, the way we generalize from experience, is not as airtight as we assume. It isn't just about ravens or apples. It is about the very process of science itself. How do we confirm universal truths? How do we know the rules of reality from the fragments we observe? The paradox whispers a warning. Sometimes, even when the logic is flawless, our sense of truth can still feel broken. The prisoner paradox. Picture a prisoner on death row. The warden comes to him and says, "You will be executed next week, but on a day you do not expect." The prisoner begins to think. He reasons that the execution cannot be on the last day of the week, because if he's still alive until then, it will be obvious that the execution must happen that day, and so it would no longer be a surprise. By the same logic, he rules out the second to last day, and then the one before it, eliminating each day until no possible day remains. With confidence, he concludes, "I cannot be executed at all." But when the execution finally comes, on a midweek morning, he is completely surprised, and the warden's words turn out to be true. This is the prisoner paradox, also known as the unexpected hanging paradox. It is a puzzle of logic, self-reference, and expectation. The prisoner's reasoning seems flawless, yet it collapses in reality. What's happening here? The paradox arises because the prisoner confuses knowledge with expectation. He assumes that his logical deductions guarantee certainty. But in truth, each step relies on predicting his future state of mind. By eliminating days, he believes he can never be surprised. But being surprised is exactly what makes the execution possible. Philosophers have debated this paradox for decades. Some argue it reveals flaws in how we define knowledge and prediction. Others see it as a warning about self-reference, much like the liar paradox. Once reasoning loops back onto itself, contradictions emerge. The prisoner paradox leaves us unsettled because it challenges our trust in logic. It shows that knowing the rules doesn't always save you, that sometimes the very act of expecting undermines reality itself. We just explored how paradoxes twist our thinking, forcing us to see the world from angles we often ignore. And that is the beauty of philosophy. It doesn't always give us answers, but it sharpens the way we ask questions. If this journey into the strange and fascinating world of paradoxes made you pause, reflect, or even smile at the absurdity of logic, then I invite you to stay connected. Here, on the Tunnel of Sane, we dive into the ideas that challenge the mind and stir the soul. So, if you found value in this exploration, please take a moment to subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss future episodes where we'll uncover more puzzles, philosophies, and stories that shape the human experience. And if something in today's video sparked your curiosity, share it with a friend. The best conversations often begin with a single question. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until the next journey, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember, sometimes the paradox is not meant to be solved.